Hi, I'm Lisa Bedford, the Survival Mom, and today I am recording part 2 of a 3-part series entitled The 3 Layers of Food Storage. This is Layer 2. Layer 1, if you watched the first video, was about grocery store foods and why grocery store foods, just ordinary things you buy at the grocery store, should take up maybe about 15% or so of your total food storage, maybe a little bit more. Things like canned stew, things like canned fruit, beans that you buy at the grocery store, pasta, any kind of thing you can easily pick up at the grocery store. Layer number 3, when we get to that video in part 3, is going to be freeze-dried and dehydrated, just add water meals. And a lot of times people think that that is food storage. And they will read the fancy sales pitches and they'll go to the websites and they'll plunk down a lot of money on just add water meals. When in fact, in my opinion, those should make up maybe just 10% or so of everything you store. So that's coming in part 3. But let's focus today on the second level, layer 2, layer 2, and that is bulk and individual ingredients. Now, if you think about it, what if you had to live for just a month on only things that were kind of ready to eat, pre-packaged from the grocery store? Wouldn't you get tired of that? Wouldn't you get really tired of just opening up another can of refried beans or another can of, tomato soup? I mean, it would get old. Plus, there would be so many additives and potentially GMO ingredients in those foods that it's just not something you would want to make a steady diet of. Eventually you would start longing for some of the recipes that you used to make. And you would start thinking about, that beef and barley soup. Remember how good that was with the fresh vegetables and the roast, that we would put in the slow cooker. You would really start to want some of those recipes, things that your family has known and loved for a long time. That is where layer 2 comes in. So, some reasons why we want to focus on individual ingredients and buying them in bulk whenever possible. They can be purchased in bulk. When I go to the store and I just see little bags like this big of navy beans or pinto beans, that's all fine and good. You can put those in a canning jar with an oxygen absorber and it's going to extend the shelf life of those. But if you're going to be thinking in terms of storing food for 3 months, 6 months, a year or more, you really want to start off with buying bigger amounts of food, and then you repackage them according to your needs in smaller containers, and you really can get a much better price that way. So ingredients, one reason to buy them in just individual ingredients is because many of them are available in larger quantities. They are the building blocks of hundreds of recipes. Now, a really important component of layer 2 is that as you begin to store these individual ingredients, you also begin to collect recipes that can be used with the things you're storing. Otherwise, someday, in a big crisis, you're going to be looking at, just this huge array of foods and thinking, well, now what do I do with it? So you want to know that you have these ingredients in there for chicken enchiladas, and you have these ingredients in there for split pea soup and chicken chowder, whatever your favorites are. And you have the recipes, or written recipes are better. At my age, I no longer rely on memory very much. So, maybe as you are putting this layer together, print out and get hard copies of those recipes. Okay? So another reason is these foods also tend to have a long shelf life. Now, in layer number 1, in the first video in this series, we talked about how grocery store foods are just not packaged for long-term food storage. So the beans inside that little plastic bag, the beans may last for 5 or 10 years or more. They may be good nutritionally and they may cook up just fine. But as long as they're in that little plastic bag that's letting in oxygen and it's letting in light, it's going to let in humidity that will affect the food, that is really going to cut down on the shelf life. So you always want to repackage in many, many cases. But these foods do have, just by their nature, a longer shelf life. I think that these layer 2 foods should make up about 50%, maybe a little bit more, of your total food storage. So if you're thinking about 15%, 20% grocery store foods, those are so accessible. They're so easy to get. With coupons, they're very, very affordable. And then maybe 10, 15% of the just add water. That's going to give you a very well-balanced long-term food storage pantry. All right, I think you're going to be happier with that than if you went all out for just the just add water foods, or you went all, way overboard on the grocery store foods. You need a balance, but by having at least half of it in individual ingredients, my gosh, you'll be able to make just hundreds of recipes. It'll just be a matter of which ones you want to make. So where do you start? Well, I started looking at grains, different kinds of grains when I first started, for a couple of reasons. They are so long lasting. Wheat, when it's properly packaged and stored, can last for 20, 30 years or more with its full amount of nutrients intact. Rice lasts forever. You can take a look at quinoa. You can take, flaxseed. Flaxseed isn't a grain, but some of those kinds of ingredients that you can just combine together to make a variety of breads, and you can make crackers and tortillas. There are so many things you can make when it comes to grains. I highly recommend oats. Oats are very versatile. They make a very hearty breakfast, but they can also be used, of course, in some kind of yummy dessert or granola or trail mix, anything like that. They're very versatile, and they also have a long shelf life and a nice amount of fiber. So take a look at the grains that your family is normally a part of your family's diet, and if you have someone in the family that requires gluten-free products, now is the time to take a look at what other grains can be eaten. And so, for example, rice, brown rice, you might go a little extra heavy on that, where someone who, is going to bake a loaf of bread a couple times a week or more, they're going to go all out for wheat. Baking supplies. Sometimes when we're packing or when we're stocking up on grocery store foods, we don't think to reach for the baking powder, the baking soda, vinegar, sugar, honey, spices, all of those kinds of things. If you're going to be putting these ingredients to use in really good recipes, sooner or later they're going to be calling for spices and herbs, and you're going to have to throw in some salt. So stock up on those baking ingredients as well. And whatever other ingredients you need for your very favorite recipes. In my book, and I don't have time to talk about this in this video because that's not the scope of the video, but I talk about how to survivalize a recipe. And survivalizing a recipe is just taking a recipe that you like and seeing how you can work with the ingredients so you can stock up on everything in order to make that recipe 5 or 10 years from now. And in some cases, it may not be possible. If you have a recipe that calls for lots of, fresh sour cream and, some ingredients that it might be a little more difficult to stock up on, stir fries are one. To me, a stir fry is just not the same with dehydrated or freeze-dried ingredients. Maybe some thrown in with the freshly sliced cabbage or the freshly sliced green onions, fine. But an entire stir fry made only of, God forbid, canned vegetables, but dehydrated or freeze-dried, it just doesn't really sound good to me. But so there are some recipes out there that you may have to say, well, we're going to enjoy this one, but we can't really work our food storage around it. Let's go on to something else. So survivalizing a recipe is just taking a recipe and finding a way to store those ingredients long term so you can make that recipe just down the road. Herbs and spices I mentioned before. Gosh, buy these in bulk. There are websites that sell bulk spices, bulk herbs. Make sure you're careful with how you store these because they can lose their flavor very quickly. Cool, dark, dry locations. And if you buy spices in bulk and they come in like those little flimsy plastic bags, just repackage them. Or take a whole bag, put it in a food saver bag, and just use your food saver to vacuum seal the whole shebang. And that might even be your best bet because you'll have the label in there. You'll know what that red powdery stuff is. Is it curry? Is it cinnamon? Is it, red pepper? What is it exactly? So that might be an answer if you're buying those spices that come just in a little plastic pouch with a paper label on it. Where do you start with wheat? Again, a whole class on wheat, but here are just a few tips. There are two main categories: hard wheat and soft wheat. Soft wheat is what you'll store for any recipe that calls for flour but not yeast. So cookies, pie crust, brownies, the staples of life. Donuts, anything like that where you are going to be just making like a pastry, desserts, you'll need the soft white flour for that. or the soft white wheat. The hard wheats come in two categories, hard red and hard white. I have both, but I think hard white wheat is typically your go-to wheat just for the standard loaf of bread. Now, when you bake with hard white wheat, you put it through your grain mill and flour comes out the other end. You're not going to get a loaf of white bread like you get at the grocery store. It's going to be more like the wheat bread that you get at the grocery store. But a loaf of bread made just from the hard white wheat is really good. Hard red just gives you an oomph, a little heartier flavor. You know, if you think Russia, think of the bread that the Russians lived on, during the famines. And that might give you an idea of the heartier bread that you would get with hard red wheat. A lot of people mix them together and they come up with, some kind of mutant flour made of the two. Let's see, you want to buy small amounts when you're just getting started. And don't forget, you're going to need a grain mill. I have found grain mills at Goodwill. You can buy them on Craigslist. Take advantage of someone who went through this homemade bread kick, a year, 2 or 3 years ago, and they got tired of it and they realized it's a lot of work, and so now they're going to sell a state-of-the-art mill on Craigslist, for $40. So shop Craigslist. You can sign up for alerts on Craigslist. So a little alert comes in your, your smartphone or maybe your email, I don't know, when something you really, really want goes up for sale. You want to store the wheat for the longest possible shelf life, and that means protecting it from oxygen, using oxygen absorbers. That'll be the easiest way. Stored in darkness, and you can get a high level of darkness using Mylar bags and buckets. If your family really isn't into bread, mine isn't. Gosh, I don't know how many loaves of bread I have just torn up and given to the birds because it dried out. We're just not sandwich people, and I hardly bake. So if you are that kind of a family, you might want to take the wheat. But by all means, buy it in 50-pound bags. You're going to get a great price on that. But then you might want to divide it up into maybe 5-pound bags using Mylar. Or you might want to buy smaller little buckets and have a 2.5, 3-gallon bucket size instead of the big, huge 5-gallon bucket. So that is just my recommendation. And then learn other uses for wheat other than just baking a loaf of bread. All right. And I learned a while back that I cannot bake a loaf of bread in my house, even once a week. It will all end up on my hips because I have no self-defense against a hot loaf of bread and some butter and honey when it comes out of the oven. So you just, learn different ways. You can make homemade saltines. You can make homemade Cheez-Its. With homemade Cheez-Its, and crackers, my biggest challenge was getting them all evenly, the dough evenly, where all the crackers were the same thickness, but you can do it. And the mills, again, electric mills are great. It's going to give you the flour quickly, but a hand mill is really good if the power goes out. So you decide which one you want to buy first, and then maybe save up the money to buy a second one later. I really like the Wonder Mill Junior. Real quick word on mills. Not all mills are designed to mill any other things other than wheat, and so some are just strictly a wheat mill. But the Wonder Mill Junior, and there are a handful of others, you can grind, that's the word I was looking for, you can grind coffee beans, you can grind rice, you can grind up beans, just anything you might want to grind up, whereas an awful lot of the grain mills, they are strictly for grains. So make sure you read the directions, and if you buy one used, go online and see if you can track down the manufacturer's written instructions for that. So bulk ingredients, packaging food for long-term food storage, checking at my notes here. Just what I do sometimes is I will just store them in canning jars with an oxygen absorber. The food grade plastic buckets, you can get those. I've been getting them either free or for $1 each at my grocery store bakery. You don't have to pay an arm and a leg for the containers that you use to store this food. A lot of LDS churches will either have a way that you can order those, and there is a website online where you can order directly from the LDS church. You get things like Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers, just things that can help you package your food. And but by all means, and my food saver, I get a lot of use out of my food saver just for vacuum packing items. So you want to just make sure that if you're going to spend that money for the food, you want to just put a little bit more effort into it to make sure it's protected as well as possible. And oxygen absorbers, my goodness, you can get those on Amazon just very inexpensively. Okay, non-traditional sources for your bulk ingredients. Bulk ingredients are best when you can get a lot of them for not a whole lot of money. And so to me, I want to be able to get a 30-pound box of tomatoes to make it worthwhile to dehydrate, or to make sauces out of that I can. So I like to find and buy the biggest amount at the best price, which of course makes sense. So you might want to look, I found a source for raw honey, organic beans and wheat on Craigslist. There's a family in Idaho and they have a route and they travel from Idaho. I don't even know what all their stops are, but they stop at 2 or 3 or 4 locations in the Phoenix area, and I can order things. And I know that just how it's being grown. I've spoken with a farmer personally. So check out Craigslist, for your area. You might also talk to local farmers. A good place to meet them is at farmers markets and different kinds of gardening classes. Sometimes they might even be the teachers if they're really successful gardeners in your area, and find out from them. Just say, hey, where can I get a lot of produce, or where can I get organic wheat, or whatever beans it is you're looking for. Produce co-ops, you can just go and Google or Bing and type in your town name and produce co-op and see what pops up. And finally, again, I mentioned the LDS Church, and there are also LDS bishop storehouses, and they have different rules. Some of them allow non-members and some of them don't. You have to come with a member. The one that I called many years ago, I must have gotten someone who was just beginning with answering the phone because he didn't have much information for me. But that's another resource for you. And a few do's and don'ts. Do stock up on ingredients you're going to need for favorite recipes. Do learn to cook those from scratch. Do buy a grain mill if you buy wheat. Do pay attention to allergies and preferences. Do not say, I'm going to buy all these canned peas because they're on sale and no one in the family will eat them. Don't assume they're going to eat them later. In fact, I think that is actually adding a stressful element that doesn't need to be there. If you say, oh, we'll eat Spam, when we're desperate enough, really? When there's a massive crisis outside the 4 walls of your home, and everyone inside is nervous and panicking and losing sleep, and you say, hey, everybody, here's canned peas and Spam, that is just going, why ask for trouble? Why make a difficult situation more difficult? So I just stock up on things that people like. Not Oreos. Oreos will not last. Don't be careless in how you store the food, again. And don't buy something just because it's on a checklist. Don't buy something just because it's on sale. I just threw away like 8 bottles of store-bought salad dressing because they had been in my pantry for about 4 years. They had turned color. I wasn't going to eat it. The kids weren't going to eat it, and I didn't even open them. Who knows? They might have exploded when I opened them. So my last category under this heading, layer 2, is freeze-dried and dehydrated ingredients. In my opinion, they're the perfect emergency food. They're very lightweight. They retain almost all of their nutrients. They retain their flavor. They are so easy to work with. My gosh, if you make, let's say, a pot of soup, you just throw the freeze-dried or dehydrated corn just directly into the soup, and the freeze-dried green beans, and the freeze-dried mushrooms, and freeze-dried onions, and freeze-dried chicken or beef, and you have soup. Add some soup stock or bouillon, and bada bing. I mean, that's a really, really easy dish to master, to say the least. They don't require any effort. The cleaning of the vegetables and the slicing or chopping, whatever, it's already done for you. And they don't require a whole lot of water. If you are stocking up on anything that's dehydrated, including those just add water meals, you do want to take that into consideration with your water storage, because you will be using water for that. But nevertheless, it's not like they're going to be using up gallons of extra water. They're very lightweight for grab-and-go situations. I mean, you can have a case of dehydrated mushrooms and green onions and dehydrated or freeze-dried corn, and you can just grab that and throw it in the back of your truck, if you have to make a hasty, evacuation. So they really are handy for that. Anyone can prepare them. I mean, it is so easy to prepare anything that is freeze-dried, dehydrated. And freeze-dried meals is going to be my last category I'm going to save for the 3rd video in this series. So just to recap, Layer 2 is going to consist about 60% of your total food storage. It will require more work from you on the preparation end, but you will end up with so much more variety. And I think happier people, because you're not going to be looking at that number 10 can of turkey tetrazzini and thinking, okay, we've had that 5 nights in a row and thank God, it's almost gone. So, this just gives you more variety, and you want to at the same time collect recipes so you'll know what to do with all those ingredients. Does that help? This workshop is called The 3 Layers of Food Storage, and I'll be back with layer number 3 on another day. I'm Lisa Bedford, the Survival Mom. Catch you next time around.